Hey everyone, it's Andrea Fenton, Integrative Nutrition Health Coach, and I am here with Sarah Shoulak today. And let's just get into it, Sarah. Sarah has just been you've created this group, this movement, and so tell everyone about all of that, about what you've been up to lately.
Yeah, well, it all started in Orlando. I actually was really involved in the art community just in general.
Mm-hmm.
And when I moved up from Miami to Orlando, probably about a decade ago, I was involved in cosplay, so we think about MegaCon and DragonCon up in Atlanta and the excuses that you have to wear a costume and turn into Wonder Woman or Superman or something like that. And it's a really fun industry, but it's also incredibly niche and specific. And it's also very expensive depending on what you do. So my angle that I took to it was to do a lot of recycled art. And then I always felt very passionate about community building just as a subject matter. And so what I did was I started a YouTube show that I called Faces of Cluos, because that's my artistic pseudonym is Cluos. It's my last name spelled backwards, so my students couldn't find me.
I didn't realize where that came from. Okay, very cool.
Yeah, so sometimes people will know me for 8-12 years and then realize it and you watch the light bulb go off. But I did the YouTube show for a while where I'd invite people on, and they were sometimes local artists or sometimes traveling artists that they were just in town for a reason, and I'd catch them and we would do this little segment. And where that turned into is that I eventually got sober. I realized that drinking wasn't for me anymore. And a beautiful way that they say it in AA is that your rock bottom is when you stop digging. So sometimes people will look at me and say, well, you weren't that bad or you weren't like this. And for me, it was just a personal choice, and I'm not recruiting. But then now here I am, fast forward, and I'm celebrating 6 years of sobriety. In December, it'll be 7, but one day at a time.
Awesome.
Thank
you.
But then I realized that it's not the fact that I don't feel like I have options when I go out. I know that when I go out to a social engagement, or if I'm going out and it is a bar or a brewery or something like that, I know what I'm going to be drinking or not drinking. I don't feel this big urge or this big pull. But I did notice that I always felt a little bit safer in environments and spaces that just didn't have alcohol. And I think the real aha moment went off when I actually went to a wedding. It wasn't local in Florida, it was actually up in Minnesota. It was my boyfriend's close friend from college, and he was getting married up in Minnesota, and there was not a single drop of alcohol. And it wasn't the fact that they were sober, they just really weren't about it. And so I think they had kind of under the table told their family and friends that you can like bring a flask if you really wanted to or whatever. But in general, just that safety of knowing that any glass I pick up or anything is just not going to have alcohol in it, and I'm not going to watch these people around me slowly deteriorate through the evening. And that stuck with me. So that was maybe October of last year. And then, or maybe it was even 2 years ago, and it was just such a powerful moment. And I had this phrase that got stuck in my head where I called myself a Sober Bettie. And it was when a friend of mine had posted a picture of a giant pyramid of cupcakes, and she was throwing a party, and she said, ooh, there's like booze hidden in these cupcakes. And so immediately, as a sober person, I'm commenting on it, and I say, well, hopefully these are well labeled so that sober Betties like me don't accidentally partake. And that, it was like a mind magnet. It was like this idea that I couldn't get out of my head, of this idea of using the phrase sober Betties. So fast forward to the beginning of this year in February, I approached my friend who had put that picture up of her pyramid of cupcakes, and she wanted to go more into event planning. And I said, I've got this brilliant idea where if you bring your event planning and I bring my community building, and we create a space that isn't exclusive, because you have places like Alcoholics Anonymous where it's not only anonymous, but you have this big word of, alcoholics, makes it feel really stressful and serious. And what Sober Betties is, as this concept of these meetup events, is to be very lighthearted, is to be very fun, and realize that you can have social experiences with people and network and relate and hang out and have a party that's just as fun as a drinking party without all of those added stressors or fears and anxieties. So that was in February when I brought up this idea with her. And since then, we did a pilot study. We did 3 little, because we're surgical minded, right? We're very analytical. And so we did a pilot where we did 3 different types of events. We did them on different days of the week. We did them at different times. We had different approaches to how we marketed them, just to do the data, get information about the demographics. What is proof of concept? Who comes out to these types of events? And what was really wonderful is we realized maybe a third, of people were sober like me. Maybe a third of the people would say, I'm not really a big fan of alcohol. I don't like what it does. I never really got into it. And then a third of the people may be drinkers, but they just weren't drinking that night. And so it was a really diverse cross section of people that we were getting. And now after the 3 that we did, the biggest question we get is if guys can come too, because they're feeling left out and they want in on the fun.
That's so awesome.
Yeah,
that's great.
So that's kind of concept to now of how the idea came about.
Wow. Yeah. I love that you said that, like I'm sober, but I'm not recruiting, and these different, everyone is welcome, as long as you're not going to be drinking that day,
right?
Or that evening, because this is not, this video is not a, an alcohol shaming, or like you said, it's not exclusive,
right?
It's just, and a lot of this I think can apply to not just alcohol, but a lot of things in our lives that we may be partaking in that are not the best for us, junk food, toxic people, sex and love addiction, workaholism, all these, just so many different things that, if you check in with yourself and say, am I doing too much of this, or am I participating in something that for me is just not healthy, or I can't have a healthy relationship with it, or I want to build a healthy relationship with it and decide what that looks like for me.
Right.
So,
and we've noticed that it opens the conversation for people to start talking about moderation, or, not that it always has to go into substance abuse, because you've got that cross section, that 1/3 I mentioned, who they just said they never really got into it. So
that's where I am.
It's not a problem. It's just, it's never even been on the radar.
Yeah. And we all have different struggles, different things that we, that we struggle with as far as moderation, or what we're doing, that may or may not be the healthiest for us. So that's great that you have this community where you're bringing awareness to that, and making it known, like, hey, like, just because parties for however many years, or how, like you grow up or you're in college or whatever, you think like, oh, that's just, there's always alcohol, and that's, am I going to be pressured to participate, or anything like that? Like, hey, you have a choice. Like, if it's for you sometimes, fine, and it doesn't, negatively affect your life, fine. But if, like I said, just check in with yourself, know yourself. So that's what's important here. And that's great that you have that community where people are like, oh, like, I can go out and not drink. And
even at our first event, the one that we kicked everything off with was in May. And when we did that one, we actually had a woman who had shown up, and she said, I'm pregnant, and I'm not far enough along that I feel comfortable telling my friends yet. I want to wait and just make sure that the pregnancy is all good. So I feel like I can't go hang out with my friends, because they'll want to drink and they'll want to ask questions. So then she kind of felt like she had to be this homebody, that she couldn't go out and she couldn't do anything social. So it's also for those little stopgaps in between. You're on antibiotics, you're on this, you're on that. You shouldn't be drinking while you're also on this. And then you almost feel like your social life comes to a halt if all of your social experiences are tied around alcohol. So in 2 different ways, not only are we saying, my mom has a phrase she loves to use, which is, any strength when overextended becomes a weakness. So if you're talkative, that's great. But if you're talking everybody's ears off, nobody wants to be around you. If you're giving, that's great. If you're too giving, you're giving too much. And so it is that reminder of where the moderation stops. And as a sober person, it is kind of funny, because when you tell people, you're this much sober, or that's the choice that you made, people get very defensive, not about you and your choices, but they're suddenly just word vomiting their consumption to you, and they're like, well, I don't really drink that much, and when I do, it's this, and it's really social. I didn't ask, and I don't mean that I don't care. It's just that I'm not trying to make everybody be like me.
Right.
It's just trying to create a space where Sober Betties, or people who put that mindset on, Sober Betties and Bobbies, that they can go.
I love that.
Right? Well, what's funny is we wanted the group to be self-sustaining, because hosting events is very expensive, and we want to not try and barter everything. We want to pay vendors what they're worth. And so we had this idea to do memberships and sell memberships, that if you do this, you get extra perks. We'll buy you brunch, we'll do these things. And the first membership we sold was to a gentleman, and his name was Bobby. So we joke that that's why we say Betties and Bobbies in honor of our first member.
Perfect.
It's so cute. It's really sweet.
That's great.
And it shows that it is inclusive, and some people just believe in our mission and want to support it in that way. But we always want to dress up and pin up and kind of have that aesthetic. And it helps because we have all the photo ops, and it also kind of flies in the face of that Alcoholics Anonymous. Not like we're trying to go against it, like you either like us or you like AA. Like AA is a great resource for the people who need that. But it also has that anonymity factor of it's almost like shameful, and you don't want to be seen, and you can't, it's closed door, don't tell what you said or what you saw. And we're so much of the opposite. We're kind of flamboyant with it, right? We're very in your face with our styles and our aesthetics, and we're going to be releasing a calendar. And again, it doesn't mean that everybody in that calendar is a sober person. It just means that they're taking advantage of our activities.
That's great. Awesome. One thing I loved on the Facebook page, the Sober Betties Facebook page, everyone check it out. One of the posts that you put up recently, you asked, what are some things that surprised you as you cut back on alcohol? And yeah, again, like I said, that can apply to so many things, like cutting toxic things out of your life or anything that you want to eliminate or lessen in your life. But what for you, what were some of the things that you noticed?
I think that the decision to get sober is a very powerful decision to make in your life because it is a bit extreme, right? It's an all or nothing thing because that's the first thing that they'll tell you in AA is if you could have just had a little bit, if you could have moderated yourself, you would have. And that if you're getting to this point, and I did go to a couple meetings in the beginning. We realized that the group wasn't for me. We had some kind of differences in opinions, which again, I'm not anti-AA. So for those
different things work for different people.
Exactly. Yeah. And you different time. And I feel like I did need to go to some of those meetings in the beginning so that I could see how other people were and how they were sharing and what they were sharing. And I just felt like the routine there wasn't for me because they want you to like go to meetings every single day, and it is at that extreme level. But what I realized most was not just the mental clarity, which is a pretty obvious one. If you're not drinking until you black out and waking up hungover, you just have a little less brain fog than you did when you were drinking heavily. Some people would probably say that they were surprised that they saved money. I think that my other hobbies have eclipsed, taken over any money I would have saved. So probably not in savings there. But I'd gone up to New York to visit a friend. And this is a friend I knew back when I lived in Colorado during my undergraduate program, which is probably 15 years ago at this point now, aging myself. But she looked at me, and we were, generally about the same size and build since I knew her. And she looked at me and she's like, oh, you've been skinny since you quit drinking. And it was not only funny to hear her call me skinny because, it was imposter syndrome. Nobody thinks well of
we're
themselves.
our own
right.
worst
I'm like,
critics.
I'm a potato. But she's looking at me, she's like, you've been skinny since you quit drinking. So not only did she also acknowledge in that time frame, but the saddest thing that I noticed on those posts when people were responding was kind of the judgment of others was really surprising to them, whether it was how much their friends distanced themselves, where they lost friends. And that was a big one for me, is the friend groups that you were always around, how much they centered around drinking. And I remember I had a friend, we were going to a 5K. We were running a 5K. I mean, I know that we weren't like the fittest and it wasn't like a triathlon or anything, but we were going to go do this fitness thing. And they had all these little booths and kiosks set up, like food trucks and stuff, which I thought was a little odd that you would have that before you go and run. Like you would think you'd want that after you run, that you get to eat and drink. And here my friend that I was there with was getting in line to get her shot or drink or whatever. And she's like, are you still doing that sober thing? So that was kind of the tone that people were taking with it. It was like kind of a phase. It was, you're doing this for a little while, and people might want that. There's a huge influx of dry January, dry July, whatever time you want.
Sober curiosity,
all of it,
as it's called.
So I love that maybe there is, you feel like just for your liver and just for your intake, you want to press pause and stop drinking for a certain amount of time, and then you'll go back to it. But you'll probably learn something during that time that's similar to these things that are surprising, whether it's how much people ask you about it, how much people expect you to act a certain way, or how much you don't miss it and how easy it actually ends up being.
That kind of tied into the next thing I was going to ask you, which was, what did you lose from that, and how did you navigate that? Like if you relied on alcohol, like some people rely on it to help them with some sort of perceived deficiency, like, oh, I'm shy, I need to, exactly. Like what was your experience?
I think that as a creative person, I think that it was very interlaced that I would be drinking and feeling creative. You know, I remember long nights in Miami where it was just me and a bottle of wine, and I would kill a whole bottle of wine doing this art all night because I would do these really intricate mosaics. And so maybe drinking that much, I felt like I could really hone in and laser in. I was like really into these mosaics. And here, fast forward later, my boyfriend is like, you drink a whole bottle of wine by yourself? I'm like, it wasn't hard. and so I feel like in some ways, whether it's the social anxiety and it's liquid courage, or you feel like it's very similar to people who abuse weed, you know, and marijuana. And I also kind of struggle with that in my life, which is the reason why I kind of parted ways with AA, because I actually do use medicinal cannabis for chronic pain, because I see myself as an addict, and I see that as a solution that doesn't get me addicted to opioids. And AA doesn't share that open-mindedness. They're saying that if you do anything mind altering, you're doing things that are mind altering. And so I respect them for having those standards for themselves. But I was suddenly on the phone with somebody who was going to be my sponsor, and she's telling me, you're still an addict. And in that moment, I remember it was, 6 years ago, I'm sitting in the car with my toxic ex, and I'm sitting here going, this could make me drink. This conversation could make me drink. Because if I'm like, you're not going to help me, he's not going to help me, I'm here alone by myself. And it was a really dark place to be in when you were making that choice, because again, if we go back to that phrase of your rock bottom is where you stop digging, it still feels like rock bottom. You don't have to lose your house, lose your family, lose your pets, and lose your life for it to feel like you're at a rock bottom. And so I was here getting this news from them, and they said, we're not going to help you because we feel this sort of way. And I said it was more important for me to do it for myself than to rely on these structures, which they would also tell you not to do, because they'll say, AA will say, if you can't moderate on your own, you couldn't get clean on your own, you're going to need us, you're going to need this structure. And I think that was why I say it's such an important decision that you make in your life, because it is so extreme. And it's going to feel that way whether you're cutting out alcohol or you're cutting out a toxic person, going back to all those other examples you gave, or even the junk food, because it becomes such a ritual, either the people that you share it with or the time that you feel that you need it. You're always watching your favorite show, that's when you grab the snacks. You always do this. And my father probably shared examples of this too, that when you're grabbing a beer, you want to have a cigarette. You have those pairings in your life that just make sense.
The associations,
and you have to rewrite a lot of those.
Yeah.
Exactly. You have to kind of overcome them and say, here's why I'm not doing that anymore. Here's the new way that we do that. And so going back to being a creative person, if you feel like you can only paint when you're high, when you need to smoke a joint, and then you can feel like you can let this flow, you have to recreate those I'm going to use the wrong, like neuroconnectors and whatever fire.
You have to make new pathways in your brain, new habits, that things that you go to, or ways that you do things that are healthy for you, the way that you have, done amazingly. It sounds like, like it sounded like at different points you were just like, okay, I'm going to try this. Oh, that's not going to work for me. I'm going to try it this way.
And it's really funny. Yeah. It's really funny how often those experiences came up right in the beginning. And maybe it was just because those were still the people that I was spending time with, or those were the experiences that I was handed. And it almost felt like those challenges, right? And there's that quote that people say where it's like, God gives his hardest challenges to the strongest soldiers, or whatever, right? That you are lined up for this for a reason. And so I remember the night I got sober, the next night I was out, I think it was Cowboys downtown Orlando, or Saddle Up, it might be gone now, but I remember being there, and I was the one handing the shots to the other people. So I wasn't sitting here with this urge to take one, but I was still so surrounded by it. And then the next week, I actually was bartering, because I do a lot of that in the creative world. And I was working with a photographer, and in exchange for a photo shoot, I said I'd come over and help him and his dad clean their house. And I was just going to come over and do some housework and tidy things up. I'm really good at that. And his dad is taking me out to his patio, and they do homebrew ciders. And I was like, well, this is so wonderful. And this is like day 3, this is like all of these interesting. And would anybody have known if I had a little tasting sip of that gentleman's cider? No, nobody would have known. I would have known. And it almost starts to feel like a Snapchat streak or something that you don't want to lose because you've been doing it for so long. And so at first it was like, I want to get to a year. And then it was like, you have all these other milestones. I want to get to 1,000 days. I want to get to, and then you start to realize how long it's been. And not to say that urges completely go away, but when you start to think of those urges, and some people handle sobriety differently. So some people I know who are sober have a completely dry household where even their partner doesn't partake and they don't keep anything in the house because it would be temptation or it would be there. And in my house, there's like Modelo's and there's liquor and there's all this stuff right around in the pantry. And, I might eye it sometimes, but there's always that feeling of it would be so tragic to waste it on something like this. And then I also think back to that toxic relationship I was in. I'm like, if that didn't make me drink, if anything would have made me drink, it was.
Yeah. So, I've gotten through all these other hard things. Right. Like what could a person like that also do? Yeah. Oh, I can handle this.
Exactly.
Like, yeah.
Yeah. And in earlier years, I remember being 18 years old and I actually competed in like a Miss Teen Minnesota USA, just hilariously owned by like the Trump Corporation or whatever. But I was in Minnesota. I was 18 years old and I'm competing in this little fashion show, or not, what do they call those?
Like a beauty pageant?
Beauty pageant, yeah, essentially. And I ended up winning the Principal's Award, which is kind of like Miss Congeniality, except instead of being voted on by the girls, it was voted on the staff. And so the staff vote on the girl that they like the most. So I won like the Principal's Award, which I'm like, I'll take that over a crown any day, because you got to do stuff if you win the crown. But if you just win one of these awards, it was like, haha. So that was my claim to fame, but I had to walk across the stage in a swimsuit. So my whole life, I was like, well, I've already walked across a stage in front of all these people in a swimsuit. What else can I do? So I ended up teaching public speaking and not being afraid of being in front of people. And I feel like that little bit of, if I can do this, I can do anything, only amplified when the if I can do this was quit drinking, because it's such a struggle in our society when every single ad, every single, like you were saying, every social situation, it's either a glass of wine, a glass of champagne, a glass of you're celebrating this, where's this? And you really do realize how much you stand out. It is. It's very, and that's why, going back to the Sober Betties, that's why I wanted it to have that pinup aesthetic, because that pinup aesthetic has been used to market alcohol and drinking culture for so long that it's like, not only are we going to look cute and sexy, but we're going to look cute, sexy, and sober. Yeah. And in these pictures, we are not inebriated and we are not intoxicated, and vis-a-vis, we're not being taken advantage of.
You're just having fun and looking awesome.
Absolutely. And why wouldn't you want to post that and share that? And it's all genuine. And I was just telling the gals this morning at the Science Center, where we were doing this other pinup event that was not affiliated with Sober Betties, but they were doing it and I was there kind of representing us. And it was so fun to see that camaraderie and them all come together and then realize that it wasn't, a drinking event. It was just so wholesome.
Yeah. And it's like, don't you feel like it just opens up your world so much when you have like you've reminded yourself, oh, I've done this. What else could a person like that do? Yeah, that's me. I can do this. I can do this. Like, your world just becomes so much more open, right?
I think I need reminders of that, because imposter syndrome does happen to anyone, and I feel like sometimes it works against you in terms of. Like, let's say, for example, I'm not afraid of public speaking. So when I think about what the highest echelon that you can get to public speaking is, I think of TED Talks, right? Being on the TED stage and the TEDx events. And I always thought that was going to be my peak. Is like, I'm going to give a TED Talk. That's going to be what I do. And then you start thinking of, well, what ideas worth sharing do I actually have? And what would an idea worth sharing be? And if I share this, what have I really accomplished with my life? And you start to look at that and go, well, the only thing I've done is the fact that I quit doing this and that I haven't done this. It feels it's like negative space in art, right? Where if you're thinking of, I'm going to make this painting, you think about filling every single space with paint. But artists and creatives will tell you that there's such a good balance when you have negative space in there and that you have things that aren't cluttered and stuff. So it almost feels like a negative, that it's like, well, you just didn't do this for very long. How good is that to just have not, what have I actually done and created and built? And I think that's why I love community building so much, because you did mention our Facebook group. So it's not just these events that we host in person, because we realize this isn't a regional concern or a regional, it only matters to these types of people. I was even joking with my mom, because she's very well connected in the nonprofit space and what she does. And so I told her we were looking for investors, people who would come in and help us continue these events and do them at a higher level. And so she's thinking of it through the lens that she does when she thinks of her charity sponsorships, and she's thinking, oh, who in their lives or in their families has been impacted by breast cancer. That's kind of what she does to find sponsors. And so she's rattling around talking about Sober Bettie. She goes, whose lives have been affected by alcohol? Well, that's everybody.
Yeah.
she kind of started there. And she said the number of people who will either care about this or have reference to this or have personal experiences of this happening to them, whether it was their parent or a grandparent or a cousin or a sibling, it really, the demographics of who it impacts, they don't discriminate. It's high income, low income, whatever job, whatever gender, whatever, it's just, it's so prevalent.
Yeah.
And it's still so taboo to talk about not drinking because it's still, why would you be not drinking?
I was surprised how much I got that. Because like I said, I don't consider myself like sober. I mean, I am sober in the way that I don't drink, but I'm not like,
they think recovery when they hear sober.
Right.
They think you're an alcoholic.
And if I've ever been anywhere, just like, and I, someone offers me a drink or whatever, I say, oh, I don't drink. It's like, oh, like, and it's funny because for me, it's not something because it's not something I've ever struggled with. I don't think about it really. Right. So when it does come up and I say, oh no, I don't do that, it's like, oh, like I've gotten some weird reactions too. And I'm like, oh, okay.
But now they're picturing you with like what did you do to be like such a mess that you had to stop drinking? You're like, no, it never got there.
And even if it has, so what, like you're better now for like whatever. Right. Everybody's story is different, but it's just, that, I was surprised by that too. So, and what you were saying too about like feeling like, oh, like what have I done just because I haven't done something? Yeah. Well, when you stop doing something, whatever it is that you want to remove from your life, you have to fill that space with something, and you've done so much.
I really do.
Like that's why you're here today. That's why, because like you are helping a lot of people, and that's amazing. And that's why I wanted to talk to Sarah today, because this is just incredible, and I'm so glad that the group exists. Sober Betties exists.
Yes. So and the Facebook group. So going back to that, so the idea was to do these pilot events for proof of concept, and then me being the ever overachiever, wanting to take something small and do it at largest scale that I possibly can. I had this vision that we could go to different states and go to different cities and pop up these events. And now here's a Minneapolis Sober Betties, or in New York Sober Betties, or let's take it to Vegas, go right in the face of where they drink the most, and let's have one out there. And my boyfriend, very practical, very well-meaning, supportive, but well-meaning. And he said, you want it to do really well here, and you want to grow it and develop it here and have it fully working here before you take it anywhere. And it was really smart, because I do want people to incentivize us to take it other places. I want there to be such a buzz around Sober Betties that people are begging, oh, please bring this to Portland. Please bring this to Chicago. I can't wait for this to be out in LA. Like I want people to be, rallying the troops to have us bring it out there versus us using our own capital and bankrolling all of that ourselves. So the idea was that if we just do these local events, then we could have this Facebook group that people could join, and they could be from anywhere. I have a friend in Poland who joined. I have a friend in, where does she live now? Thailand, and she joined. And I have people in all these different places, whether it's just in the continental US or wherever, that they're still sharing in these conversations. Like the idea that you got from the post that I made that said, what surprised you when you gave up alcohol, or what do you feel like you've gained or lost, or any of those prompts, people can take advantage of those from anywhere. And that's really what strengthens the community, because that shows people it's okay to not have these conversations that are all about alcohol. And there'd be different prompts. It's like, show us your go-to water holder, which for me is like, this big like thermosy container stuff. But people get really proud of their water bottles or their devices that the whole Stanley situation is like a whole cult. Sorry. But people get really proud of that, and they connect to that. And so people like that just as much as they like their favorite alcohol. And so it's just redirecting the conversation to, what about these beverages? And originally I only wanted it to be that Facebook group because I thought that would be enough to moderate and maintain as these people are joining and answering the questions and feeding it prompts and doing all the stuff like that. But then the feedback we got was not everybody likes Facebook. People are kind of distancing themselves from Facebook in a way. And I said, okay, well, I've done an Instagram before for Art House when I had my own house, and I was using it as a creative kind of co-working space. Just like if you were going to go meet up with someone and try and collaborate, you'd have to probably meet at like a Starbucks or a Foxtail or some coffee shop to talk about it. And what if you were talking about like body painting or a memorial, knitted thing of you can get some weird ideas with art is my point. And the more you try and do them in public spaces, it may not feel like it's facilitated there. So I did this in my house. I called it Art House, and it was this co-working event, and I had its own Instagram. And I said, okay, well, if I'm going to create an Instagram for my house, I guess I can create an Instagram for this Sober Betties concept. And then what we do on that is a little bit different than the Facebook group. We actually share a lot because they have the story, the disappearing story on Instagram. And so we share a lot of recipes. So I started following a whole bunch of people who do like juicing and smoothies and just non-alcoholic beverage options. And so whether it's a cool raspberry lemonade or it's some kind of blueberry mocktail.
Fun mocktails,
right?
Yeah.
And so people can see these, and that's another reason to follow and be engaged in our accounts, because they're getting something informational, and we don't have to create that content. We just follow all these accounts that have these fun recipes. We're like, have this, homemade ginger ale, or have this, and it can be really creative. So people can follow us for a number of different reasons on a number of different platforms.
Yes. So please, Sarah, share all of the platforms. Where can everyone find you, follow you, the group Sober Betties?
So in the structure, again, I don't do anything small. Everything has to be like overproduced and large. But the idea is that there is an umbrella company that will be its own company, but the umbrella is called the Shirley Temple Society, because I thought it was the cutest little name. It kind of reminds me, for those who are of us millennial aged, but the Are You Afraid of the Dark on Nickelodeon, they would always have these meetings of the Midnight Society, and it felt so cool, and it felt so exclusive. So we have these little pins that you can buy, and it's 3 little cherry stems that make a triangle, which is the Celtic knot, which is actually very symbolic for women specifically, and like the 3 phases of your life, like birth, aging, and then passing and on to the next thing. So there's a lot of symbolism. I wanted it to look kind of Da Vinci Code and like Illuminati-esque, right? I wanted it to look kind of cool enough to not be drab and like your mom's potluck and like that's your non-alcoholic event. So the Shirley Temple Society encompasses everything that we do. So when I mentioned the memberships. So when somebody buys a membership, you're buying your membership to the Shirley Temple Society. So you feel like you're kind of in this upper crust, right? But then when we go out and have these parties and the bashes where we dress up and have the photo ops and it's all very pin-uppy, that's Sober Betties. And that's where you can say I'm a Sober Bettie or a Sober Bobby. And so that's a much more marketable name, being like Sober Betties. So that's kind of the structure. That's kind of how it evolved. And so on that note, if you just go to soberbetties.com, and Betties is spelled Betties, soberbetties.com. It's the same thing on Instagram at Sober Betties. But then the Facebook group, you'll see it says Shirley Temple Society Sober Betties. So if you just search up in Facebook for either of those names, you will find us.
Awesome. Yeah. I just want to leave everyone with this. I loved this post that I saw on the Facebook page. You are loved as you are, and you are not defined by how well you keep up with others drinking. Do what's right for you. So everyone remember, do what's right for you. Find Shirley Temple Society, Sober Betties, and you can find me on Instagram at AG Fenton. I'm Andrea Fenton again. Thank you so much, Sarah, for talking to us today. This was awesome.
Yeah,
Thank you.
I really appreciate it. Thank you. And thank you all for watching.
Thank you.